Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Hello. As some of you may already know who I am, I'm Alicia Mayo of Clari-T Media. I am also now the social media and digital marketing associate with Sustainable Solano, and I'm glad to be here with you. Joining me today is Jonathan Irwin. He's program manager for Resilient Neighborhoods with Sustainable Solano. Thank you for joining me here, Jonathan, this morning for our community conversation, our first of our many online community conversations, I hope. So,
Yeah,
good
thank
morning.
you. Good morning. Thank you, Alicia. Look forward to being here.
Well, let me just introduce the audience to Sustainable Solano just a little bit. Jonathan, stand by. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first edition of Community Conversations on Live with me, the new digital media marketing associate. I'm so happy to join Sustainable Solano. It's an effort near and dear to my heart. Many of you don't know that I'm the kind of girl that loves to get out in the dirt and play, and I love the environment, and I love renewable energy and all of those things that sustain us as people. But many of us are not educated enough on it. And so this opportunity that I have to work with Sustainable Solano will allow me to bring more education, more information to all of you to share what is happening in our environment and how we can learn to be a part of sustaining it. And Sustainable Solano started in 1999 in the community gardens of Benicia, California. It began largely as an all volunteer organization, working to bring local sustainable food to Benicia over the years. The gardens expanded from a single community garden, then to two more gardens and a community orchard, and seven permaculture demonstration food forest. I'll tell you more about that, and Jonathan will share some more about that. Also, community folks got together and supported other agricultural partners and sustainable landscaping education programs, food donation, share plots, and created a newsletter, and just continue to be active with environmental awareness and neighborhood resilience efforts and initiatives. And it grew and grew and grew because, as we know, that with climate change, we have to get more educated. We need to be better stewards, right? So, as Sustainable Solano grew, the efforts and the needs grew. And now here we are being introduced to even more so that we can all get together and participate. And the programs have expanded now beyond Benicia, okay, but becoming clear that the organization has outgrown the small area of Benicia, but that is the foundation. The folks in Benicia have done a great job to bring forward Sustainable Solano, and they had to change the name as a result, and now have invited other folks like you and me in to participate with doing the work. So now that I've done that introduction, and nice to have you back there, Jonathan. And this is new for a lot of us. It's new for me. In a lot of ways, there are some things that I know about sustainability, and then there are a lot of other things that I don't know. And so, this is just the beginning of a great education and hopefully a great partnership with the audience and other folks who want to get involved. So, let's get to you, Jonathan, and your work. Tell me how you find creative ways to help communities build better versions of themselves in your work with Sustainable Solano.
Yeah, I mean, first off and foremost, like acknowledging that communities are already working to build better versions of themselves. Oftentimes there's greening organizations, gardens, community gardens being started. People that are being really creative on the ground already in terms of addressing gray water use and kind of plants and environmental factors. And so Sustainable Solano and kind of the efforts that we bring in is bringing in a little bit more wider education and kind of skills and resources to build on those efforts and help kind of make everyone thrive. Also exposing them to some new issues. There might be someone in Rio Vista who's doing something that's very interesting, and well, we've learned through Vallejo, we've learned through Benicia, we've learned through these other places, and kind of that exchange of knowledge and acting as a community platform for people to kind of build their work sustainably and with the environment in mind.
Well, from your perspective, tell me what you think are some of the characteristics of a resilient neighborhood, for example, where you've seen people getting involved and doing the work or not.
Yeah. A resilient neighborhood to me is a group of residents, neighbors, renters that are all working together for a common cause. Whether that common cause is climate adaptation, climate mitigation, or to build a social fabric amongst the neighbors. Maybe it's creating a local food system within their block where people are sharing vegetables and kind of growing different things for different houses. It's taking into account kind of how can their neighborhood on a community level really address and work towards a better environment or addressing these kind of impacts and causes for climate change.
Well, that's good to hear. Do you see people really asking and looking for more information about how to create more resilient neighborhoods, or is there a need, in your opinion, to really educate and still get more folks involved?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm also relatively new to California, so I'm learning a lot along the way on this. But particularly during kind of the recent crisis that we've had with fires, the current drought we're in, the rising sea levels and flooding that is expected, people are definitely looking for ways to adopt their houses so that they are lower maintenance, so that they are more resilient towards kind of these swings and the erratic weather that we're having with fire and water and sun. And just, I think people are definitely reaching out and getting more, but in terms of thinking about these efforts and kind of shifting the mind in a lot of times of what does a good landscape look like? What does a healthy landscape, what is an environment that contributes to the earth versus kind of possibly hurts it or malpractice? I think that type of education is definitely something that we're building on and trying to improve across the county.
Yeah, well, so it took an emergency like the fires, for folks to kind of get aware, including me. I'm in the fire zone here in Solano County, and it was scary having to evacuate twice, and just grabbing what I could to now realizing that, oh my goodness, everything around my house is so dry. How do I prepare it? Um, So, can you talk a little bit about what kinds of things I can think about to protect my house and against fire damage?
Yeah, so not my complete expertise, and we're actually
Mhm.
hosting a workshop this evening for anyone that's interested, Lush Landscapes, and we'll make sure that a link gets sent out for that. But the idea is kind of how do we create a more, and disclaimer that like these actions and things are not necessarily going to stop the fire from getting to your house, but adding a layer of protection, adding a layer of resilience, this idea of creating a lush landscape, this idea of kind of adding moisture back into the soil, back into the plants so that they're less likely to burn, and creating kind of a defensible barrier zone between the house and vegetation in a manner that allows for plants to thrive and allows for us to kind of enjoy the aesthetics and the benefits of what a garden and kind of landscaping can provide, but also acting as a defense for encroaching flames or loose embers and other things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that helps. And again, I'm including the ticker below. As you said, there's an event happening this evening, the Fire Talk, and that's happening on Facebook. On
I believe it's on Eventbrite, but
Okay.
I think it'll also be live streamed on Facebook as well.
Yeah, folks can look for Sustainable Solano on Facebook or go to the website, and I'll include that in the ticker in just a few seconds here. Let's see. You can go to, I'll pull it up in just a few here. Give us a second here. Okay, so the website is in the ticker below. It's www.sustainablesolano.org. If you'd like to know more about tonight's fire talk online on the Eventbrite registration site. You can get signed up there and check that out. You also have something else coming up, and that's the Flood Walk. That's happening June 26th and July 17th. That's running, and it's in the ticker below. We'll talk about that in a second, but I want to get back to something you mentioned, and that is the regarding food and growing your own food. Describe what a food forest is. I've heard about a food forest. What is a food forest, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, when I first started, I always thought a food forest was just kind of like an orchard, and not necessarily much more than that, growing up in Kentucky and everything like that. But a food forest is actually a very intricate system, where trees shade plants that are like bushes and shrubs that shade ground cover. And each one of those elements all kind of work together to create food. And you could have strawberries or blueberry bushes growing to shade some of your salad greens and these other things. So it's a much more kind of complicated and intensive process, but you get a lot more for your buck in terms of you're growing all this different food at all these different levels. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing kind of ecosystem that we've created.
Amazing ecosystem. And we have so many here in California. Talk about the ecosystems, the food forest here in Solano County that you've seen and learned about so far since you've been here.
Yeah, so each of them is different depending on the location. I mean, obviously with all the microclimates and kind of contextual atmospheric things that are going on, the weather and stuff within that. But yeah, no, there's some of them in Benicia. There's definitely, we've installed, I believe, around 43 food forest backyards, gardens, et cetera, across the county. And in April every year, we have a tour of all the food forests, so you can go out and see them all. But yeah, it's such a drastic change from what you imagine a garden to be in terms of kind of like a raised bed scenario or kind of the monocrop cultures that you see on a typical farm, and the diversity of food that can be grown from herbs to vegetables to fruits to everything is just an incredible array. It looks a little different than the kind of what you imagine a garden to be. It's a little bit more kind of wild and erratic, but in that you just get so much more of a plethora of different types of foods. Yeah.
Exciting. And I think you're saying that maybe we can kind of create our own mini forests. Food forests.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, I'm excited about that. Because fresh food, organic food, fruits and vegetables cost so much. It's nice to be able to grow your own stuff. So I'm looking forward to getting involved in that. Also, okay, so you're like my dictionary right now. Okay, okay. I gotta get a few definitions before I can go on with conversation. And hopefully my audience is learning something. You guys are all learning something out there. If you have any questions, please include them in the comments, and I'll check as we go and see if I can answer any of those questions for all of you. Jonathan, please explain what permaculture is for us. I've heard of permaculture. It's PERMA culture, folks. Okay, a word for the day. Permaculture. Thank you.
Yeah, no. So permaculture is a way of looking at the land and looking at the earth and how people and everyone kind of interact. The three tenets of earth care, people care, fair share. So making sure that everyone and everything is kind of mutually beneficial in a system, an ecosystem, and using kind of indigenous land practices and other things. The basic definition, I would say, is kind of regenerative agriculture, kind of mimicking Earth's natural processes. It's a lot of what actually stands for that kind of the base knowledge for what we do at Sustainable Solano. Going in, kind of looking at the ecosystem, looking how the plants can help the soil, how the soil can be hydrated and work with water systems that are around. And it's really a much more kind of intensive and a way to set up, because you're like pulling on from all these factors. But once it's installed, or once you've kind of built the land in a permaculture approach, a very much kind of lower maintenance, lower resource, you're not using as much water, particularly in a drought, way to kind of garden, to look at landscapes and to look at ways to landscape that are beneficial to the earth, to people, and to everyone. What we're also finding out is those practices are actually quite resilient in adding different kind of mechanisms and things, security around fire, around drought, around flooding. because if you can mimic nature and if you can recreate nature in a lot of ways, or work with nature versus against it, it's going to be able to bounce back from all these kind of disasters and crises that are down the road.
Okay, so that is a great explanation. I'm showing some pictures now for the audience here of some of the work that's being done by Sustainable Solano in resilient neighborhoods with some of the volunteers, as you can see here. And then here, getting together here. That's you there, conducting one of your neighborhood walks. Can you tell us a little bit about the neighborhood walks and what you're doing during those walks, some of the things you're sharing with the participants, and whatever else you can share with us about your resilient neighborhoods tours.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as part of Resilient Neighborhoods and the work that we're doing specifically in Suisun City is we're looking to address flooding across the downtown area and kind of how it mitigates and moves through the different areas of Suisun. And so the flood walk is actually kind of it's an amazing experience in terms of seeing this information that we're getting on a regional level in terms of rising sea levels, in terms of stormwater surge, in terms of tidal flooding, and seeing kind of how does it happen on a neighborhood? How does the local impacts move through how does the water kind of move through the different neighborhoods, and what are the kind of vulnerabilities that are outlined? It's a little scary when you first see it and understand, and always keeping in mind that we're showing this stuff so that we can then start building solutions for the future. But the flood walk is a 2 hour walk around Suisun City, where we're kind of just showing the different infrastructure as it is now, and then particularly looking forward 20 or 30 years as rising sea levels can potentially have much greater effects in that kind of local region. What are the impacts and what are the things we should be looking out for, or what should we be planning for now as we build kind of a flood resiliency action plan with the city of Suisun?
And there are some really dire situations going on with climate change and rising tides and different levels of flooding. Explain a little bit about, or take us on a mini flood walk. Just, give us a highlight of what the concerns are.
Yeah, so looking at the data that we have now, looking at Suisun City in particular, Suisun City is built right on the edge of the marsh, Suisun Marsh, one of the largest estuaries on the West Coast, marshal tidal kind of landscape. The city, since its beginning, has had a relationship with water and had a way of kind of managing it. The downtown area was actually built on kind of natural islands that were out in the marsh at one point. And then as the city has developed and grown, you've got an infill of kind of dredge material and other factors that have kind of encroached in the marsh in some ways, as well as deteriorated a lot of the riparian kind of natural sponge of the ecosystem. As we're looking into the futures of the models of climate change, and particularly around rising sea levels with our data partner, the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, we're seeing that it could potentially have upwards of 1 foot to 2 feet of water increased in sea levels by 2050.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a pretty substantial thing, and that's just the rising sea levels. This is not including the kind of possible storm surge that could happen, or even king tides and these larger events that could further kind of put pressure on the infrastructure that's currently protecting the city, or all of the infrastructure within it. So with the flood walk, as we're walking around, we're kind of seeing that. I mean, it's a little bit of a imaginary kind of experience in terms of can you imagine 2 feet of additional water around this place? But looking at the vulnerabilities, looking at the levees, looking at kind of the infrastructure that's been built, a lot of it was built back in the 1970s and before, hasn't really been updated and hasn't been kind of thought about. And even in the city's most recent plans, as far as hazard mitigation around flooding, did not even mention kind of sea level rise and this kind of larger impact that can happen.
Right.
So in trying to educate people and think about in terms of, 2050, it's 30 years away. People that are buying houses in Suisun City now, by the time that mortgage gets paid off, or hopefully the mortgage is paid off and everything like that, there's a potential that their house is actually underwater, or their house is kind of could be encroached. So that we're trying to, I mean, at this point, we're trying to educate and raise awareness around it, but also start building those solutions and start building kind of this into the vernacular conversation of Sassoon about, okay, how are we preparing? How are we getting ready? And let's be more informed rather than kind of just responding to a crisis or responding to whatever the thing is at this point.
Right. And I kind of feel like, like you said, respond instead of responding to the crisis, that's what we've been doing. We've been responding to the crisis and not preparing, not putting any dollars into infrastructure. And President Biden has talked a little bit about infrastructure, but infrastructure not including some of the most important infrastructure, like the basic stuff, But I don't know what it is, why people don't think about that at all. And so I'm happy to know that you're out there educating, learning yourself, and then bringing the information back to all of our communities. So, all in all, Jonathan, let me ask you on all of your areas of work, describe how it all overlaps and addresses environmental as a whole issues. Social equity, cultural context, with the lack of understanding, the lack of participation, the lack of support, in your opinion, and I know that's kind of a lot, but you know, you're young and you're bright and you're out there, you're on the ground, and you are seeing things from a whole point of view, and that's what Sustainable Solano is all about. It's for the good of the whole, and that is our mission. So tell us about your thoughts about that whole interaction of the intersections and how all of this interlaps and affects us.
Yeah, no, the people aspect of all of this work, I think, is the most critical in all of it. The environment is going to change, and it's going to go the way that it needs to go to survive, and it will adapt on its own in a lot of ways. But how are the people and how are the communities impacted, and how are they going to adapt, and making sure that that is done in a equitable, inclusive manner. You start looking at the data in terms of how socially vulnerable, low-income communities of color are often impacted further by kind of where industry was placed, wind flows and stuff next to highways, behind levees, etc. There is a gigantic need and a very like almost and lots of a reckoning in the environmental space of just kind of addressing these populations that are not typically included or typically part of the conversations. The work that I'm doing, like that is what needs to be done. Like that is why we're doing these flood walks, is meeting more people where they're at to educate themselves in their own communities. Understanding that, yes, flooding is, particularly as we're looking at rising sea levels and we're looking 20 to 30 years down the road, flooding is not necessarily going to be the top of mind, particularly in a drought. So finding ways to kind of educate and to build awareness and build on the efforts that are already on the ground, whether they may be beautification, kind of implementing different kind of greening strategies, or people who are just looking to redo their yards. How can you do that in a way that contributes to what their needs are and what the work and kind of their goals are within their kind of immediate time frame, but also can contribute to this larger vision and larger mission of protecting the community as a whole and making sure that the community is preserved or kind of mitigated as we look into the future. Yeah, I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yes, definitely. And I hope that the audience is inspired and are ready to get involved. There are sustainable groups across the Bay Area, but we welcome those of you in other counties to participate with us here in Solano County with Sustainable Solano for sure. It's worth the drive because once you get up here, as you can see in some of the pictures, there are some beautiful locations, and that's where the next flood walk will be taking place in Sassoon City, and the information's there running in the ticker below about your next flood walk, Jonathan. So just give a little invitation to the folks regarding the flood walk as the ticker rolls there.
Yeah, please come out. Register online at sustainablesolano.org. We look forward to kind of showing you the impacts of what climate change can be, but also start thinking about solutions. Sassoon City is obviously impacted by flooding. Maybe where you're coming from or where you're at, you don't think about flooding, or it seems a little bit far off, but it's definitely, particularly as fire season and kind of these other things are rolling in, this kind of disaster preparedness through the landscape. Hopefully along one of these walks, you'll kind of re-see your own neighborhood or your own community and kind of what different works can be done to make it better prepared, but also a more resilient neighborhood.
Right. Thank you so much for being with me for our first online talk together, Jonathan. I hope to do more of this. Thank you so much. This talk was very insightful and inspiring. Thank you again, Jonathan Irwin, Program Manager of Resilient Neighborhoods with Sustainable Solano. And that's all for now, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here. Please visit our website at www.sustainablesolano.org. That's where you'll find more information about the flood walk. The registration links are there. The fire talk that's happening later this evening, that link is there on the website as well. And that's also where you can help support this important work for the good of the whole with a tax deductible donation and find out how you can get involved. I'm Alicia Mayo. Thank you so much for joining us here on Community Conversations with Sustainable Solano. We'll see you all next time. Thank you so much for joining us.